Guess who has become India's biggest trade partner? And that is the United States of America beating China by over $1 billion for the April to September time period. You have the US with over $59 billion of trade emerging as India's biggest trading partner in terms of value, albeit the fact that both India's exports to the US and India's imports from the US both have declined in the recent past. In fact, the overall value of trade between the bilateral trade between India and the US is actually down by over 11% as compared to the same period in the previous year. And yet, the news, the big headline that's emerging from all the trade data that's been published by the Commerce Ministry of India is that the United States of America has now beaten China to become India's biggest trading partner. The bilateral trade between India and China too declining by over 3.5% to just about $58 billion. There too you see India's exports to China and imports from China both declining as compared to the same period in the previous year. And yet the news that emerges from it is that as far as India's bilateral trade or trade partnership with the US is concerned, it could hit into positive territory very soon, despite global uncertainty and challenges that is bringing the overall import-export numbers down. And of course, India's measures to mitigate as much of imports from China into India, and in general trading relationships with China. So a pattern emerging there, US becoming India's top trade partner. Exports to US, bear in mind, was down to $38.2 billion during the April to September period of the year 2023. And imports too were down. Two-way trade in India, China down by 3.5%. China was, bear in mind, India's top trade partner from 2013-14 till 2017-18. And back again in 2020-2021 as well. China retaining the title of India's primary and biggest trading partner. And before China, it was the United Arab Emirates, UAE, which is India's biggest trading partner. But now all that's forgotten, because now we have a new leader, and that is the US. We have Teresa John, Deputy Head of Research, Lead Economist at Nirmal Bang, now joining us live on the broadcast. Teresa, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Business Plus and News 9 Live. Talk to us, both imports, exports between India and the US declining, and between India and China also declining, and yet the US emerging on top as India's biggest trading partner.
So I think broadly the picture that's playing out is, in terms of positioning, US and China in terms of top trading partner, they have been, kind of switching places over the last 2 years. So, going by the first half data, I wouldn't read too much into that, but a clear trend that is emerging is some of India's exports to the US, particularly in the first half of FY24, have done quite well, particularly in the non-traditional sectors. So like smartphones exports to the US have seen a sharp pickup. It's up nearly 500% year on year. Similarly, even sectors like the photovoltaic cells, you've seen a sharp pickup on a year on year basis. Even as we've seen some slowdown in traditional sectors like chemicals and gems and jewelry. So overall, we've seen a situation where India's exports to the US have fallen at a slower pace when compared to the fall in imports from the US.
Right. As you are telling us, there is also clear policy measures and efforts being made by India to make sure we import less and less from China. And in fact, India depends lesser and lesser on China as the world is moving away from China as a primary trading partner. So in that sense, this would further the efforts, and the way the numbers are going, the bilateral trade between India and US could grow into the positive territory as well. So that's a more clear, as we go forward, that picture will emerge very clearly, won't it, Teresa?
Yeah, there is a possibility that exports could pick up in the second half, but that really depends on the US domestic demand situation. If the US goes into a recession, then you could see some slowdown across the board, and so it's not a given that the exports could pick up in the second half of the year. But yeah, India's dependence on Chinese imports is coming down. I mean, we still are dependent on China for a lot of machinery, even consumer durables. But that dependence, particularly on the consumer durable side, and even in products like toys, plastic articles, etc., because of the deliberate policy, that is coming now.
Right. So India's dependence on China is coming down. The question here is that how do you see the trade between India and U.S. flourishing or even improving at a time when the U.S. is risking a recession going forward, and especially at a time when the high interest rate cycle is set to continue even further in the U.S.?
So, I mean, one way that India could have an advantage going forward is like if you see in products like, as I said, smartphones, etc. India could have a cost advantage, and that could continue. So, probably in those non-traditional sectors, you could see continued growth. But I mean, I don't think India is immune to a US recession because we do have nearly 17 to 18% of our exports going there. So these non-traditional sectors can contribute, but I think it's difficult to say that you will see a very meaningful pickup, even if we go into the positive territory in terms of India's exports to the US in the second half of FY24.
All right, Teresa, the one other thing that comes to the mind at this stage is the question of GSP, or Generalized System of Preferences, and the benefits that accrue from that. The US needs to reinstate India into its GSP list so that the Indian exporters to the US can benefit from that, and this number can grow further, isn't it, Teresa?
Yeah, so if you look at GSP, so Generalized System of Preferences, that was in force till June 2019. India was one of the biggest beneficiaries in terms of GSP. So I think there were about just over $20 billion of imports that came into the US under GSP, and nearly 25% plus of that came from India. So to that extent, India's exports kind of benefited from the GSP. But you've not actually seen a meaningful fall in exports, because GSP was removed. So if that is reinstated, I think there will be certain sectors that could benefit, probably iron and steel, plastic products, maybe to some extent machinery and gems and jewelry, to some extent organic chemicals as well. But what remains to be seen is whether the overall export trajectory, I don't think we'll see a meaningful change, even if GSP is reinstated, but there certain sectors could definitely benefit.
Right, that's the word coming in from Teresa John, Deputy Head of Research, Lead Economist, Nirmal Bang. We will leave it at that. Teresa, thank you so much for taking time out to help put these numbers into perspective. And as you're rightly pointing out, can't be misled by these numbers. You need to understand these numbers in perspective at a time when both exports and imports from and to the US and China are declining as far as India is concerned. But definite change in the trajectory of who is or who's going to be India's biggest trading partner in the days going forward.